Well, we didn't end up breaking the red flag record in Australia this past weekend, but I'd say we had a major shakeup with some previous champions, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, 2 previous champions didn't even finish a race.
Before we get into that, guys, I want to plug our merch store, turn1podcast.myshopify.com. I'll put the link down in the description below. We have a ton of F1 merch available, and we're adding more, but we want your suggestions as to what you want from an F1 fan. So comment and let us know what you want to see, and we'll certainly add it to our store.
I want to shout out the DFW F1 Club, or Breakfast Club, depending on where you're looking. These guys always put on an awesome show. We always have multiple different projectors. This time it was at night, so it was one giant projector on the wall and a crowd of people. It was sweet, man.
It's an awesome setup. There was probably, 60, 80 people there. I can never really tell how many people, but it was a lot. They had food and everything, so we'll tag them as well. But a great crowd that Bill gets out there every weekend. Let's move into our race weekend. We'll touch just briefly on qualifying. We know that's not everybody's cup of tea, but it was certainly interesting seeing Carlos, I think, take the fastest Q1 session. That shows that Ferrari's got pace. What did you get out of qualifying?
Qualifying was interesting. We saw Carlos Sainz at Q3 to finish with the results. He completely split the Red Bulls with Sergio finishing down below. Lando had an amazing qualifying session. Hulkenberg had a little bit of a mix-up where Sergio kind of got in the way a little bit, so he was unfortunately out in Q3, but Magnussen got into Q2, so there we go, Haas boys. I'm there for that. You might have noticed there was a lack of Logan Sargent. Let me tell you about that real quick. So Alex Albon crashes his car in one of the practice sessions, and basically Williams was like, hey man, we think he has a better chance of getting points, so we're going to put Albon in your seat, which is horrible.
It's a slap in the face to Logan, but at the same time, that's his place in the team right now. When you're not getting points and out producing your teammate, you get replaced by your teammate.
To finish it up, Hamilton doesn't get out of Q2. That one hurts, so he starts in 11th.
Yeah, and only one of the Alpines got out of Q1, which...
Out of Q3? Wait, hold up. Yeah, Q1. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, they made it to Q2. Esteban did.
But
Pierre didn't.
It is the first time that an Alpine made it out of Q1, so...
Things are on the rise at Alpine. No, let's... the big notes from qualifying, obviously Max gets pole, Carlos gets second. While Sergio does quali in third, he gets hit with a little infringement penalty or whatever and gets moved down to sixth. So that's where he ends up starting the race. You also have the McLaren of Lando Norris actually starting in third, which I called it before this race, but McLaren is figuring out. They're not quite there yet. Obviously, I don't think they're quite on Ferrari's level, but they might make a case to be ahead of Mercedes, and we might see that more as we go through the Australian Grand Prix. All right, I like it. Let's do your favorite segment. Break down the action-packed turn one.
I love this segment, but I gotta say, as far as craziness, probably the biggest letdown. Everyone in the top 7 just files behind each other, rightfully so. I mean, Max does his typical cover off of whoever comes in second, which, that's fine, but Carlos didn't really make a push at it anyway. He just kind of slots in behind. You don't really start to see action until we get past 7th. You'll see Lance passing Tsunoda. I mean, that's kind of a given. Unfortunately for Tsunoda, he finished way higher in qualifying than he should have, considering those Aston Martins are fast. Alonso does not get a good start. He gets passed by Lewis and Bottas. Bottas has an amazing start as he goes past Albon and Alonso, ends up sliding himself right up in there, right behind Lewis Hamilton. Now, the back of the grid, just to finish this up, the back of the grid does get bunched up a lot. You see a lot of aggression going into turn one, but nobody does any kind of overtakes. Everybody slots in behind each other. It did get hairy, but that's about it.
There's a couple things that I noticed for this turn one. So obviously last year was a 3 red flag race, and all of the chaos happened at turn one during the 3 or 4 different restarts of the race. This year, we don't have any new drivers on the grid. Daniel Ricciardo didn't race in Australia last year, but he's far from a new driver. He's been to Australia so many times. He's from Australia, so he knows that track well. So all 19 drivers on the track experienced last year in some form and fashion. And so I think they just wanted to preserve their own races, and they all drove relatively clean. The other thing, and I'm not saying that this would be a difference maker, but without Logan Sargent out there, you're removing a wild card from the grid because he has been known to drive a little erratically and not really know his place at the start of races, especially when he finishes higher than 20th. And so by not having him run in that 3 or 4 wide group that was 16 through 19, it increases your chances of making it through turn 1 cleanly.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Let's move into the race where all chaos ensues shortly after the race starts as Max and Carlos are duking it out, battling, going turn to turn, and then out of nowhere, Carlos gets DRS on lap 2 and passes Max, and the crowd went crazy at the DFW F1 Club. Now, in hindsight, at the time, we thought the Ferrari legitimately had the pace on the Red Bull. That is until we saw Max on fire.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's funny there because the entire time we're thinking, wow, Carlos is really showing some good pace on this Red Bull. Then it comes to find out Max is basically driving around with his handbrake on the entire time as one of the brakes refuses to unlock.
It went from a really impressive drive from Carlos, which it was to deal with that, to that was really impressive for Max to be driving around with his right rear brake on for 2 laps and to make it back to the pit. So it's the first time in 2 years. His last retirement was Australia 2022. His right rear brake was locked up basically since the start of the race. The brake caught on fire because, of course, it was overheating. It ended up blowing his tire off as he was going to the pit and blowing a couple other things off the car. And your previous 3-time world champion is out of the Australian Grand Prix after only 3 total laps, I think is what it counted by the time he got to the pits.
Yeah, that's rough.
That was the main storyline from the race until a little bit later when your boy, the other champion on the grid, minus Fernando Alonso, he also goes out. You want to detail that a little bit?
Yeah, Lewis Hamilton, he's flying. He had good pace. He was making moves. All of a sudden, he goes through a corner, and as he's coming out on the exit, the car just shuts off, completely loses power, and he's cruising basically to a complete halt, trying to find a place to pull off, finally finds one, pulls off. So therefore you have a virtual safety car because there's no need for an actual safety car or a red flag. He's nice and safe off the track. But now you got 2 previous world champions completely out of the race. And my mind was blown and heartbroken, of course, but that's how it happens sometimes.
At that point in the race, we were, minus Lewis, after Max was taken out, the top 4 racing for essentially first place, you had Carlos, Charles, Lando, Oscar, Sergio was up there battling. Alonso was still kind of up there in the mix at a certain point battling. It flashed me back to Carlos's win last year. Like, once you take Max out and now Lewis out too, you've got a legit race between like 6 qualified drivers. And I'm not going to say it was the most action-packed Grand Prix we ever saw, but there was a lot of really good racing to move in and out of that top 5 throughout the day.
Oh, yeah.
You had battles between Russell and Alonso late, which we'll cover here in a little bit. You had Charles. Ferrari in general, I don't know what the deal is. If I'm them, I'm keeping Carlos. I know it's too late. They can't do that. But they continue to run this Charles first strategy that I don't even understand. With Carlos in the lead, 6 seconds up, 4 seconds up, whatever it is, they put Charles on the undercut strategy, not only to cover off Lando, but to try to get ahead of Carlos, is how I saw it. Because they ran Carlos a long time on all those stints.
Yeah, I'll play a little devil's advocate here. So Charles came onto the radio and said that he was losing his tires. Carlos didn't. In fact, Carlos was cruising out in front, had a lot of time between him and Charles Leclerc, and it didn't look like anybody was going to make a move towards him at all. So with your number 2 guy at the time, Charles Leclerc, struggling on his tires, and you have one dude who's just driving in clean air, nothing going on around him. Yeah, I can understand pitting Charles first because you want to get him back out there on some fresh tires. But I just feel like if you're gonna pit Charles, you might as well bring in Carlos first just to make sure that he holds his lead. Because this whole narrative of Charles Leclerc getting the better treatment at Ferrari when you're supposedly supposed to have 2 first drivers, it's annoying. I hate it, and I don't like it at all. I feel like, yeah, I understand. You're already giving up the seat. Carlos is gone. He's not going to be there. He was the only Ferrari to win a race last season, and he's your lead driver for this race. So
and
why?
He's probably going to be the only Ferrari to win a race this season. I mean, Max, take away the technical issue, Max wins that race without a doubt. I mean,
oh, yeah, 100%.
That's going to be all season. You have to hope that he has a car failure. That's it. So yeah, I don't know what Ferrari's doing. If you've got an idea, give us a comment or shoot us a message. Let us know what your thoughts on Ferrari are. Kind of one of the sad moments for the day real quick. The hometown kid, Oscar Piastri, gets the old team swap orders for his teammate Lando Norris, who was running faster, to be fair. Lando was having a little bit cleaner of a race. And so they swap the cars around and move Lando up.
Yeah, see, I understand this. And we talked about this a lot. Oscar is coming into his own. He's becoming a really, really good driver and consistent driver. He's no longer making those basic rookie mistakes that we've seen so far. It hasn't been a long season so far. It's not like we're halfway through the season or anything, but we've seen a lot of consistency from Oscar this year. So what we're looking at now is the true paces of the two drivers. And it's clear that Lando still has that pace advantage on Oscar Piastri. That's the only reason why I could see why you would switch the cars, because even after they switch, it's not like Lando up and took off from Oscar Piastri. He got a little bit of a gap, but then Oscar kind of hung with him for a good while, which kind of leads me back to this whole Oscar and Lando's pace is really starting to get like the exact same. Like they're very similar, but Lando still has just a little bit of pace advantage.
I think we're seeing that Oscar was a good call, though. Credit to Zach Brown stealing him away from the Alpine system.
Yeah, imagine Oscar Piastri right now in the Alpine car that's at the back of the grid. We would have no idea what his potential is.
Did you hear the record that Lando broke?
No.
I don't know if it's a great record to break. He now is officially the person with the most podiums without a win.
Oh, no.
14 career podiums, not winless. He passed Nick Heidfeld's record.
No, I don't like that. Here's the problem with that. He got so many podiums last year in a season where nobody was beating that Red Bull car. So that's rough,
I know.
man.
He's gonna get one. He's gonna get one of these days. He'll pull a Carlos when Max is out or whatever, has a technical issue. He'll be the guy storming ahead and taking the lead. Maybe later this season when McLaren runs out their first upgrade. We'll see.
Yeah. I see our next topic. I want to jump past it, save it for a little bit later. Before we get into that next topic, I want to talk about the Haas and Albon battle for 10th.
Yes.
So this battle was incredible. Albon holding that 10th spot. You had K-Mag behind him. Hulkenberg was a lot further back. But then basically once this whole Max Verstappen thing happened, a bunch of different people pit. They left Hulkenberg out. I think it was a great strategy. Hulkenberg stays out, gets positions on all these different guys who are pitting. So now you have Hulkenberg way higher up. Honestly, more higher up than he was supposed to, but that's fine. Then when this whole Lewis thing happens, you're starting to pit everybody again. You pit Hulkenberg. Hulkenberg maybe falls a little bit further back. He gets about to where he's supposed to be, but because he stayed out on that first virtual safety car, we now have Hulkenberg in this fight for the points with Kevin Magnussen, with Alex Albon, and it was a steady battle. Hulkenberg eventually gets past Kevin Magnussen because he's on fresher tires. He's on the fresh mediums. Magnussen's out on those hard still. Hulkenberg, they make the switch. Hulkenberg takes that spot, and now Hulk is chasing down Alex Albon, so much so that he gets right up on him, and Williams is like, hey man, pit. Because they're trying to go for an undercut, hoping that the Haas's are going to pit again, and therefore Alex Albon will have fresher tires, he'll have better pace, he'll already start making his way back up there. That doesn't end up working, and the Haas's take 9th and 10th, which I loved, by the way. I ate all of that up.
It's interesting because, you might have mentioned this, but the Haas's pace and Alex Albon's pace, I'm not going to say Williams' pace, Albon's pace is neck and neck, and we've seen that a couple times already in the 3 races we've had this year. Haas is making improvements, I think, on that car just in general. They have slowly moved their way back up to like legitimate midfield contention.
I personally can't even say that the Haas is on pace with Alex Albon. I think the Haas has surpassed Alex Albon's pace just because of Alex's limitations with that Williams. I
That's
think
true.
that their pace is more even with the RB team, as we see Yuki Tsunoda getting way up there along with the Haas's. So it's tough to say, because you have Daniel Ricciardo a little bit further back. I would have loved to see the Haas's get past Yuki. I think Yuki got way higher than anybody expected him to in this race. I would have loved to see the Haas's over both of the RBs. But until I think we see that happens, I think it's safe to say that RB and Haas are the two teams that are standing out from the back markers, and they're pretty much neck and neck.
Is it crazy that your new midfield is Mercedes, Aston, RB, and Haas?
Yeah, that's not something you would expect to see. Alpine
You would have
out of
asked
the
me that like
picture.
2 years ago. I would have been like, "You're insane. Don't talk to me anymore." The fact that one Mercedes is included in that, and the fact that Alpine isn't, and that Aston, it doesn't make any sense.
And Haas, who's been finishing last for like, I don't know, 3 of the last 5 seasons, are now as high up as they are.
Just had to get rid of Gunther, apparently.
No, stop it.
Okay, so I'm glad that you skipped our next topic, because it leads into our final 2 points that we want to make, which is really, it's really one big point, but it's how the race concludes. So obviously you have Carlos come home to win, followed by Charles, Lando, Oscar, and Sergio. That's your top 5. But then things get a little bit crazy, because you had a race to finish in that 5th through 7th spot as we were coming around the last couple, like 2-3 laps of the race. George Russell was chasing down previous champion Fernando Alonso, the only champion left in the Australian Grand Prix. We're watching somewhere else on the track. Maybe it was the finish. Maybe Carlos was crossing the line at this point, and then the camera cuts, and George Russell is on his side without multiple tires. Walk me through that event.
I see our last point. So this bothers me, this whole thing, but I'll explain it the best I can. Basically, you had Alex Albon, or Jesus, I don't know where that came from. You have Fernando Alonso and George Russell battling out for that 6th place position. George Russell is right up on the back of Fernando Alonso. They're going through, I forgot what turn it is, but they're going through a turn, and George is so close to Fernando Alonso. He gets bad air coming out of that back of that Aston Martin, loses all aero whatsoever on that Mercedes, which in turn loses all downforce, meaning he now no longer has traction going around that turn. The car slips out. George Russell goes flying into the gravel, slaps the wall, knocks off his tires, so then he's heading back towards the track. The tires get up underneath the car, which is what causes it to flip and kind of sets it to, because normally F1 cars, if they get on their side, they're immediately going to fall back on their
his was like this
top or outside. Yeah. So it was propped up by the tires that had broken underneath it. They were sitting up behind it. So now you have George Russell just sitting on his side, dead center of this track. Now, because it was the very, very last lap of this entire Grand Prix, they didn't go to a safety car. They didn't red flag it. They just ended the entire race on a virtual safety car, which is fine. I understand that. But the problem with this is what became of this way after the race, because now the FIA has to go and they have to look at everything and see, was there any fault of Fernando Alonso? And the verdict that they came out with was atrocious, in my opinion. The verdict that they come out with is Fernando Alonso, who finished 6th, gets a 20-second penalty, knocking him down to 8th.
No contact with Russell. No
None.
Contact.
So here was their justification for that. They said that once they looked at the telemetry, they saw that Fernando Alonso lifted a lot more, I guess.
100 meters earlier.
Okay, so therefore he was going slower into that turn, meaning George Russell was able to get right up on the back of Fernando Alonso. So it's almost as if Fernando Alonso purposely kind of gave way so that George could get right up behind him, messing with his aero and causing George to spin off. Now, there's 2 ways that you can look at this. One, Fernando Alonso did do it, in which case I don't think he expected George Russell to lose all aero and completely whiff it into the wall. I think he was just trying to mess up George's exit so that George was not able to get a good run on that exit and pass him on the very last lap. Now, ultimately, what ended up happening was a completely different tale. But the other side of that coin is that Fernando Alonso wasn't trying to do that. And if that's the case, this is ridiculous. I mean, either way, it's ridiculous because no driver on the grid ever intentionally wants to wreck out another driver, ever. So either Fernando Alonso wasn't trying to do that and he was just trying to bring the car home, or he was just trying to get George Russell to have a bad exit. Either way, he was not trying to cause George Russell to slap a wall. No driver ever tries to get another driver to slap a wall. So this 20-second penalty is completely outrageous. It's completely outrageous. For one reason that really shouldn't be a reason, but it does bother me. Yuki Tsunoda now moves up to 7th, and the reason why this bothers me so much is because Nico Hülkenberg in the last race finished in 10th, giving him 1 point. Haas are now the only team of all the back markers to have a point, and they move up to 6th, right behind Aston Martin. Now, in this race, Haas finished 9th and 10th, meaning that Nico Hülkenberg brings home 2 points, Magnussen brings home 1, Haas are now at 4, and Yuki, if he had finished in 8th, would have meant that he got 4 points, and now RB and Haas are tied at 4. But now, since Yuki gets 7th, he gets 6 points, and RB overtakes Haas in the Constructors' Cup. It bothers me. It shouldn't, and it does not matter when we're talking about Fernando Alonso and George Russell, but it bothers me.
So yeah, his 20-second penalty moves him from 6th to 8th. And here's the biggest issue I take with this. 1, I don't think that was erratic driving at all. 2, I don't think you should go to telemetry to see if a driver lifts early. I might understand if he slammed on the brakes, like in brake checked a guy. We've seen Fernando Alonso get brake checked by Lance Stroll before. Like, we have seen that. This was lifting. And if you're unfamiliar with the term lifting, that means you just take your foot off the accelerator. You're not throttling, you're not giving it gas anymore. You're just coasting at that point. He didn't slam on his brakes. To me, that's on George to pay attention. Or if there's a driver giving you time and letting you get up that close to, make a move. Be ready for a pass. Like, don't just, succumb to the bad air that you've been sucked into. Be prepared as a racing driver to make a move with whatever situation's put in front of you. If nothing else, if you want to give him a penalty, give him 5 seconds, like the standard warning. Don't give him a 20-second penalty. That's insane. And you called it. Yeah. It's because they had to actually penalize him. So in order to move him down like 1 or 2 places, it had to be 20 seconds.
If it had been 15 seconds, he would have only moved down 1 spot, and his teammate Lance would have overtaken him. But instead, because it's 20 seconds, Yuki also overtakes him, so it bothers me.
Yeah, they want the points to be messed up, because if they had just switched the 2 drivers, it really wouldn't have messed up the points too much.
I want to end on a little funnier note here before we start the conclusion here. Stake, for the 3rd race in a row, messes up horribly in the pits, giving Bottas another, 15, 20, 25, whatever it was, second pit stop. Then they do the same thing to Zhou later on, and even when they have a consistent and a good pit stop, it's 3.8 seconds, which is just nowhere to be found, and like double. If you were to take McLaren's fastest pit stop or the fastest pit stop ever from last year, it's more than double that, and it's just atrocious over at Stake F1. They need to figure things out.
Their mechanics, their pit crew, like, they come out disorganized. They can't get their equipment to work. It's a disaster over at Stake. They got a good-looking car, though. Finishing up on this note, we're looking at kind of worst performances. Another horrible performance is going to be Alpine. They are last. I mean, there's no getting around it. They're last. I mean, tied with Stake, if nothing else. Like, if you want to put those 2 down there, but Stake's only last because they have horrible pit stops. I think Stake's performance is better than the Alpine performance. You had Pierre Gasly finish in 13th, and then you had Esteban Ocon finish in 16th because he got a tear off in his air duct.
Yep.
Okay, I guess we've seen that happen to like Charles before in Spa or whatever, but I still can't wrap my head around Alpine not even being in the fight for like the top 5 or 6. They're in the fight for 9th. Like, that's so sad.
That's pretty bad.
Okay, to wrap this recap up, let's look at where our standings are, because we've had a couple of things move around. So mainly looking at the constructors here, Red Bull is still first at 97 points, but it's close because Ferrari, with a 1-2 finish, surges ahead to 93 points. They are 4 off of the lead. McLaren continues its surpassing of Mercedes. So they were ahead of Mercedes last week, I think 28-26, and now they are ahead 55-26 on Mercedes because you had both the Lewis and George DNF. Also, side note, going back to George really has to figure out how to finish races when he's battling. Do you remember the last time he was in a battle like this? Las Vegas. And what did he do? Crash.
Oh, yeah.
The dude can't finish a dogfight race. Like, he should be able to put on the exhibition that we saw Sergio Perez and Alonso do in Sao Paulo last year. That's what George should be able to do. But we don't see that. In your midfield, you have Aston Martin in 5th at 25 points, and then there's a big gap down to 6th where you have the new RB team at 6 points, Haas at 4 points, and then all three of Williams, Kick, and Alpine are tied for last at 0 points.
If you're taking a look at the driver standings real quick, both Aston Martins now pass Lewis Hamilton. So that's interesting.
Okay, guys, let us know in the comments if you enjoyed this Australian Grand Prix.
Guys, if you think that Steak F1 makes a comeback next race and they get the fastest pit stop that's ever happened, I might agree with you.
All right, we'll see you.
Bye, guys.